There was a lot to unpack in that session. We had basically 3 different headlines. We had jobs data, which a lot of people say maybe is not the most important. I disagree. Anything for the economy right now is important. JOLTS data were fine. We didn't have anything terribly alarming come out of the White House except for a 50% update on the tariffs for Canada. Saw a little reaction to that, but if you believe the tariffs are not the lone cause of this, these headlines start to look a little bit less meaningful by the day. Certainly they're playing a role, but there's so much else, including rotation, and that's where things got a little complicated the last 48 hours. Today's sell-off was concentrated in Apple from the beginning, which was weak, and that followed on to yesterday, which is one of my important charts I went through because Apple kind of acts almost like a liquidity reserve, as Zed Francis put it to us today. And to me, that fits with a few other metrics that suggest the odds do favor a bounce. But the price action is just miserable as we faded again, despite encouraging headlines about Russia and Ukraine. The market just looks heavy, and there's no way around it technically. So I'm not changing any of my red lights, despite the fact that I do think in the short term, ahead of CPI tomorrow, a few things point in favor of some support. The first one is just the degree of extremities we've reached in terms of volatility. It's been a weird path with this VIX stair-stepping up, but basically where we're at, this is the 3-panel chart I got from Alex Coffey. Dispersion versus VIX, VVIX versus VIX, and VIX 3-month versus VIX. You can see all of these are very much on the low end of the ranges. These are events that we have in the markets that get to this point out of a place of surprise, and then they start to be absorbed. And usually that's when the market lets up and you get a bit of a bounce because they're just rarefied statistical levels that we've reached for these different volatility metrics. The other thing is just looking at the intraday action today and yesterday, even though we did have rough sessions, they were different in nature. Yesterday was really nasty, but had a decent bid into the close, and then today looked very hopeful, and then we faded, and we kind of ended in the middle of the range. But the point is that there's been a back and forth trade. And that back and forth trade, I think, is encouraging. Volatility in VIX here in this stair step is concerning, though, because it's not really what VIX usually does. VIX usually just pops on big surprises. Pop. The yen thing did kind of have a little bit of a buildup, which isn't terribly encouraging. So VIX looks like it either goes to 50 here or it drops back off, which that kind of comes back to the Apple point in the intraday chop in today's session, because if folks are starting to normalize their positions. They've tapped into Apple as kind of a last reserve. They sold off some of the value stuff and the outperformers, which is what we saw today. Today it was selling in value. It was selling in the things that have been holding up better than tech. You saw some nibbling in some of the tech stuff. Tesla erased all of its presidential premium yesterday, so you would think there would be some support there on that chart. And the S&P has this back and forth that shows there's some life for the bulls, because today there were bears that got smoked. You opened up the downside, Bitcoin was looking weak and like we were about to break, then you ripped to the highs of the day. So bears got hurt today, bulls got hurt today. At least that's a development, a small incremental positive to think that if inflation doesn't shock tomorrow, then we should be in a decent place for a rally or at least a bounce. Maybe you don't want to bet on a massive rip, but selling downside put spreads, maybe even looking at volatility in either direction, maybe owning straddles like Joe Mazzola mentioned, because if tomorrow's number is bad, and the price action's already bad, I don't even want to talk about what kind of scenario that is. That's why the red light's holding, but I'm eager to turn it yellow on some of these sprouts of hope.